We will just give it 1 minute. People are still joining in, so that then we can start.
Okay, yes, let's start. Hello and welcome all to the Cambridge City Seminars. To those who are joining us for the first time, the City Seminars is co-hosted by the Department of Geography and the Martin Center from the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. In this year's seminar series, we are bringing together academics, practitioners, and students in the field to talk about the theme of urban guilds in contemporary placemaking. We've had a wonderful talk in the last session by Professor Biao Xiang on the subtopic of places of vernacular activity. We are now moving into the third subtopic of hyper-guilds and alternative spaces, and we will continue this common theme of engaging with the concept of urban futures. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Carlo Ratti with us. Carlo Ratti is a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the director of the MIT Senseable City Lab. He is a leading expert on urban life and design and is one of the most influential architects internationally. Professor Ratti has appeared in media such as the New York Times, Financial Times, and the BBC. Three of his projects, Digital Water Pavilion, the Copenhagen Wheel, and the Scribbit, have been included in Time magazine's list of best inventions of the year. Professor Ratti is currently serving as the co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanization. Today, Professor Ratti will be talking to us about his topic, Sensible Cities. If anyone has questions or discussion points that they would like to make, please write it into the chat box or the Q&A column that you can see in the Zoom at any time during the talk. And after the talk, my co-convener Rashid will facilitate the Q&A section. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Carlo Ratti. Carlo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And, I'm so happy to be back at the Martin Center. Unfortunately, this time just virtually, but I spent a few years of my life at the Martin Center, and it has been a great time. So I think that's probably what you should have mentioned in the bio. That I did my PhD, my MPhil and PhD there, and I'm very fond of the time I've spent in Cambridge and, of course, at the Martin Center. So what I wanted to do is share with you a few slides. I'll keep it quite short. I could flood you with slides, for the full hour, but I want to keep it a bit short. If you wish, we can actually look at more projects. I might use some more slides in the Q&A, but I just want to put some themes on the table, and then we can have a discussion. So I want to talk about what I call the sensible city and the relationship between natural and artificial. And now, if you think about the relationship between natural and artificial, over the past few decades, there has been a lot of thinking about how the natural side, the human side, is being hybridized with technology and with the artificial world. Think about Donna Haraway, a Cyber Manifesto, and a lot of work that has happened along those lines, which is actually quite an old idea, as you see in this kind of engraving from the 1600s. Now, today is actually happening something quite interesting, that digital and physical are combined. And so what I wanted to suggest here is that, we've looked a lot at how the natural world, let's say the human world, hybridizes with artificial and with technology. But the exciting thing we can look at today is actually the opposite. Is how we can go from the artificial to the natural. How we can start from the world of cities, from buildings. By the way, by artificial, I take the definition that was given by Herbert Simon in his great book, The Sciences of the Artificial. So how can we go from the world of the artificial and hybridize it with the natural world? And that's really exactly the symmetrical transition, not from natural to artificial, but from artificial to natural. And here I want to share with you a few projects that look at that, and look at that through different lenses. Through the lens of technology first, because thanks to sensors and data, we can understand the city, for instance, or a building like a living organism. But also thanks to nature itself, how nature itself can enter more and more into the palette that we use in our everyday life as architects, designers, engineers, planners, or researchers. So I wanted to start with this project. It's quite an old project. It's a project from 2006, so it's 15-year-old now. The project was in Rome, was in Venice at the Venice Biennale, and that was actually the first time ever that we managed to, well, it was the first time that we managed, well, so we managed to get cell phone data from a large Italian city, in this case Rome, but it was the first time ever on the planet that we managed to get hold of data, anonymized data from millions of people, and try to understand the dynamics of the city in real time. We called it Real-Time Rome. That was our pavilion in the Venice Biennale. The data was collected in the city of Rome, as I mentioned, you see to the left. The data was sent in real time to servers we set up at MIT, and then it was analyzed with artificial intelligence, with different type of processing. We would visualize it and send it back to Italy, not to Rome, but to the Venice Biennale. So somehow all of this was happening in real time or in near real time. As I said, today when we look at our phones, we find similar data, and we can, we can get real-time information from the city. But at the time, actually, this was the first experiment of this type, and some of the papers and patents that were filed at the time are still used today for some of the applications that you see. I want to share with you just a very small moment of that, that monitoring. This is just a visualization of this particular day in summer 2006 during the Soccer World Cup, when actually Italy was in the final. And here you see the city of Rome with people moving here and there before the match, until when the match begins and nobody speaks anymore, silence. France scores, Italy scores, halftime, people talk and go to the bathroom. Second half, end of normal time, first overtime, second overtime, a famous headbutt by Zidane, the player, and finally Italy won that night. So that was again, to see how through data we can look at the city like a living organism. We can get all this kind of real-time information. But also you can look at this. That's another visualization. Both projects, by the way, where these are just, visualizing very large amount of data. But behind it, you can do a lot of analytics. So the previous one, again, data from cell phone. In this case, data from taxis. What you see here is the city of Lisbon, mapped using billions of data points collected from the taxi network. And if you analyze the data, you can then do interesting things. What you see here is similar data in New York. Every dot is a pickup or a drop-off. A yellow dot is a pickup, a blue dot is a drop-off. What you see here is JFK Airport. If you zoom out, you see JFK was down there in the lower part of the image. You see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. And then, we started asking questions. We asked, for instance, the first question we asked was, if you look at those 2 points in Manhattan, they are connected. You got trips by taxis in excess of 200,000 per year. So how many trips could be shared by people without creating inconvenience, without creating a delay in arrival? And in order to address the question, we tried traditional methods based on linear programming, but linear programming fails when you got such large quantities of data. Sometimes, we say big data requires big math or new math. So here we actually use network science to address the question. You see here we use a system called Shareability Networks. You see them here, visualize, and what we discover is actually quite interesting that in Manhattan, you could take everybody to destination with a small delay, 50, 100, 150 seconds, you see in the upper left graph, but with 40% less vehicles than what we have today. Now, two interesting things. One is that when the paper was published, the New York Times reviewed it and said, this is an interesting theoretical piece of research, but you know what? New Yorkers don't want to share anything. Well, it turns out that that's not true, because the other thing that happened is that the results ended up on the desk of Travis Kalanick. At the time was the CEO of Uber, the founder of Uber. At the time, Uber did not have Uber Pool. And we started a collaboration between our group at MIT and Uber. And as you know, today, Uber Pool does exactly this. Allows two people going more or less in the same direction to share a ride. And Uber Pool actually has been the pioneer of a number of additional services that now you can see for Didi, for Grab, for Ola, for Lyft, for Via, you name it, for many other companies that operate in this space. And the interesting thing is that, you know, it means, as I said, two people going more or less in the same direction and sharing the ride, which means one less car on the road, all other things being equal, of course, but one less car on the road, less energy consumption, less congestion, and less pollution in our cities. So again, how data can help us to read a city like a living organism, but also to apply analytics and intelligence to the data itself in order to try to reprogram or redesign the city. Incidentally, this work had a lot of mathematics. You know, you saw the paper before. I put the paper because you can look at all of that if you're interested in the math on our site. You can download them for free. You know, there was a lot of maths, but I see this as a design question, is a design paper, because it looks at, you know, how different the city could be. Using the same data, we did more recent research. It was a couple of years ago, using similar data set where we asked another question about how to optimize not sharing of rides, but fleets. And again, you find huge potential for optimization. This actually led to our latest startup in the United States that is trying to use this and bring it to cities, like an operating system for cities that can hopefully make them more sustainable. Sorry. I wanted to share another dimension. This is actually a paper we did with Rex Ritter. Rex Ritter was a professor at the University of Cambridge, and they moved to Boston. So we kept on working together. We co-authored some papers when I was at the Martin Center. And then he moved to the United States and joined our lab. And so Rex has been a wonderful colleague. And so here we looked at where energy is consumed in buildings and where people are. And when you look at that carefully, you see that there's no relationship whatsoever. We put a lot of energy to heat or cool empty buildings. So we started thinking about this idea. Can we think about some kind of local warming, about you know, how the building can respond like a living organism again to people, and you know, and then we can potentially save a lot of energy. We did an experiment that's actually the main entrance at MIT. So MIT, we asked the institute to install it, and you know, people walking on the carpet would get this kind of bubble of heat during the winter when it's very, very cold, following them. And the interesting thing as well is that you could set your temperature, so you could customize your own heat bubble. Well, we did it. People loved it. Some people freaked out a little bit, but then that led us to do an installation that you see here. This was at the Venice Biennale again in 2014. It was when Rem Koolhaas was the director of the Venice Biennale. So he invited us to install it as an example again of how buildings could respond in a more dynamic way to us. And you see here the system being installed, a lot of researchers from MIT. All those different elements are collimated infrared beams that then track occupancy underneath. And you'll see it in a moment. So, you know, at a place like the Venice Biennale, you need to do something that's very visible. You know, it's like an art installation, but the same system then with our design office, and I'm mixing today deliberately some of the work we're doing at MIT and some of the work we're doing in our design office. We actually implemented in a building. This building is the headquarters of the Agnelli Foundation. The Agnelli family is the main shareholder behind the Economist magazine, Fiat Chrysler, and a number of Ferrari and a number of other companies. And you know, and this is a family foundation. So what we try to implement here is a similar system what you saw before, where actually heating, lighting, and cooling follow people around the building and respond dynamically. Again, with the idea that you can save a lot of energy because you can turn things on and off, and also with the fact that you can create better environmental conditions for people. Here you see some initial renderings of the building. Here is the build, some of the built elements. You see these kind of panels that radiate and change heating, lighting, and cooling. And some of the interior spaces also in the more historical part. It's an existing building that we refurbished and changed a little bit. You see, by the way, it's not related to the heating, lighting, and cooling, but related more to the natural and artificial theme is the sculpture that you see there, which was done by Olafur Eliasson. And what we tried to achieve with him was, again, to create something that would let light and mobility be permeable from one side of the building to the other without allowing direct lines of sight. So it becomes like a kaleidoscopic wall, and that you see here. And also, again, the idea of natural and artificial blend in the building in other ways, really with the garden entering inside and the offices going outside, this kind of embrace. So again, the building in different ways explores this theme of natural and artificial with technologies and sensors that make the building behave like a living organism, but also by using lighting and green in different ways that bring dynamism inside space. There's another project we did. This project also was at the Venice Biennale, and this was quite a small apartment, but here we tested another idea. And the idea was, how can we use a new type of projector? This projector, developed initially by IBM, has a mirror, and that mirror allows you to throw projections wherever you want at 360 degrees. And so the idea was, how can we design a space where every surface can become a projection surface from one single point? You see, projections could be here, could be here. The way we did it was by creating a geometry that would maximize the co-visibility of surfaces. And so the place can be an exciting place to live when everything is off like this. Or if you turn it on, any of those surfaces, white surfaces, can become like living through digital information. This is another project we did at the World Expo in 2015. The World Expo in 2015 was in Milan, and we worked a lot with expos. We've done the World Expo Pavilion in Spain in 2008. This was 2015. We're working now on the World Expo in Dubai for the Italian Pavilion. The reason is that the Expo is a bit like Burning Man. The Expo is like creating a temporary city where you can push the boundary more. So in this case, the theme that was given to us was the future supermarket. This was the pavilion of the future, but the theme of the Expo in Milan, for those of you who might have seen it in 2015, who might not have seen it in 2015, was feeding the planet. And so feeding the planet about farming, about agriculture, and about production, and also, of course, about selling products. So in this case, the head of the Expo asked us to look at this pavilion that we've seen in many, many expos, like this beautiful, architectural experiments were done at the Osaka Expo in the 1960s, and were, with the pavilions of the future. So in this case, the future, they wanted us to try to imagine it as the future supermarket. And we knew what we didn't want to do. We didn't want to do this. It's a beautiful image by Andreas Gursky, but kind of an alienating image of the supermarket of the 20th century. We were inspired by this sentence by Italo Calvino. Mr. Palomar is kind of a aloof provincial guy who one day goes to Paris. And in Paris, he goes into a cheese shop. And there, little by little, he starts looking at pieces of cheese and what every piece of cheese is telling about where it's coming from and so on. So Calvino say, Mr. Palomar visiting this kind of shop, feels as he does in the Louvre. Behind every displayed object, the presence of the civilization has given it form and takes form from it. And so we like this idea as well. You see it here. This is a beautiful painting by Gattuso, this richness of interactions you have between people and products, and people through products. And so we try to bring that to our space by using sensors that detect when you approach something. Many of you might be familiar with the sensor is a Kinect sensor that has been used a lot in interactive architecture and design. And and then it is when you approach something, just you will get seamlessly that information about what you're touching or what you're looking at, what you are approaching. Somehow you can still buy an apple in a couple of seconds like you do today, but if you've got 5 seconds, you can learn a bit more about that apple, about, you know, where it's coming from, how many miles it traveled, how much CO2 was emitted. And if you've got 15 seconds, maybe you can know even more about it. So we designed the place as bit as a theater. You see here the initial rendering with the idea that you will see all the products from the entrance. You will go up the stairs and see everything from the entrance with all these kind of different layers of digital information. Here you see the pavilion built. It actually won a number of prizes, and some of the technologies actually has now been implemented in supermarkets in different countries because it very seamlessly tells you stories and gives you information about the products. You see the inside, you see some of the other views, you see all these different layers of information, and also people playing with the products. You know, kids loved it. They would jump from one to another one, to the other one, and see this kind of accordion of information opening up in front of them. And, you know, very basic information at the beginning, nutritional values, carbon footprint, you know, price, and so on. But the more you play with something, the more you would discover. So again, an example of how to, you know, to use technology in this case to make the building itself more responsive and to play with natural products and technology, each of them augmenting the other. Now, if at the same time at the World Expo in Milan, we also won the competition to design another pavilion for New Holland. New Holland is one of the main farming, agricultural farming equipment producers in the world. And the idea we wanted was very simple. We just, let's put a pavilion behind a farming field. And the farming field, let's put self-driving tractors. And if you got self-driving tractors, then you can use them in order to, you know, to basically print at the scale of agriculture. You can put different seeds in different places and do a little bit like what you see in this image. Now you might say, okay, that could be cool, but, you know, why the hell would you want to print at the agricultural scale? Well, I would say that that is actually very, very important. It's very important because, you know, agriculture in the 20th century has been primarily monoculture. But monoculture is devastating for nature. Nature doesn't do monoculture. Nature will do something else. We'll put different seeds next to each other and create a much richer ecosystem, you know, that's much more robust and much more resilient. Monoculture is very fragile. You just get the wrong bug, and then you need to use huge amounts of, you know, pesticides or other chemicals in order to protect your crops. And so the idea was, you know, can we think about a future where this could be feasible, where thanks to robotics, we can go back to farming in a way that's much more similar to what nature does. And actually, Benedict Gross, who was a researcher at our lab the year before, did this as his thesis at the Royal College of Art. And he said, you know, let's imagine we want to do this. And let's imagine we only have 2 crops to simplify things. And in those 2 crops, you know, what is the shape? Doesn't really matter too much. You can do any type of shape, but, you know, let's imagine they're based on cells, like what nature probably would do. But, you know, we can then do more studies in biology to see exactly what is the better mixing between the 2 crops. You know, with or without the smiley face that you see on the right side. And so we tried to do it. So you see here the very precise locationing system for the tractors. You see here the results, and I'll show you a little video. Yeah. So this was before, a couple of years before the expo. So you see here the drone showing the final field. You see two different types of props. You see it better in a moment, but you start seeing here, you know, the different cells with the two types of props. And exactly what you saw on the computer before, including the smiley face, is now in this agricultural field. So again, another way to play with, in this case, with nature and technology, and try to think about a future where farming can go back to what nature has done for hundreds of thousands of years, and not to what did in the 20th century, which is you know, just simple monoculture overall. Now, again, I'm moving between different type of projects, and so this was the project you just saw was more speculative, but I'll show you another design. This is actually a tower we co-designed with Big in Singapore. We won an international competition together. And in this tower, you see how we're trying to bring nature in the tower in a different way. There's both on the top and in the middle, there's a public space, a suspended plaza on Singapore. And the suspended plaza becomes like a tropical forest. As you see here, a place for people to meet, to live and work outdoors. One of the things I spent part of my life in Singapore, where we have a team, and you know, I hate the fact that I cannot stay outdoor, that I'm always I feel like in a fish tank, always in air-conditioned buildings. So here you can actually have the opportunity through nature to enjoy outdoor living in there and meet other people. It becomes, you know, a gathering place for the tower. And just a couple of final things wanted to share with you. In this project, this was in Milan, in the center of Milan, a couple of years ago. It was the opening project for the Milan Design Week. And, you know, the organizers came to us and say, you know, can you do something for the opening of Milan Design Week? We say, sure, be happy to help you. But we told them, you know, we don't want to design another chair. We think, you know, there's already enough chairs and different chairs on this planet. I think design should look at other questions, should engage with other questions. In this case, we wanted to engage with nature coming back to our cities and also changing climate in a sustainable way, changing microclimate in a sustainable way. And so what we did a building, a pavilion. In the center of Milan, you see in the back, you see the Duomo. But the idea was a pavilion where you could have 4 seasons at the same time. So you had spring, summer, fall, and winter, just in a space of a few meters. By moving through space, it would be like moving through time. But the important thing would be actually doing that in a very sustainable way, using the energy from the sun to then produce the different flows in a way that would allow the different seasons to emerge. I will go a bit fast on, you know, the shape of it, but you see here the diagram of how the pavilion works, energy from the sun, and then you go heating and cooling, like your refrigerator. When you cool on one side, you heat on the other. You manage the flows precisely with precision, and then you can get the 4 seasons happening at the same time. And you can see here the pavilion being built. That's, you know, to the left you see the Duomo, the cathedral. To the right is Milan's Royal Palace. You see the photovoltaics on the roof. You see the entrance here with the axis going to the Royal Palace. And inside you had, you know, you see the summer here. Summer was like a real Milanese sweaty summer, even if, you know, Milan Design Week is in April, early April. You had winter with real snow. Again, all done by using the energy from the sun and using it to create heating and cooling. Or the spring with blossoming trees and the fall. And here is a short video. Now, I wanted to finish with this part. I gave a couple of more things to tell you at the end, but finish this part by sharing with you this project. Here, this was this was actually last year. It was Milan Design Week. And we were given a beautiful place, hidden place in the center of Milan. It's called the Orto Botanico, or Botanical Garden in the core of Milan. It's a place that was designed in the 18th century. It's really a hidden gem in the very center of the city. And here they asked us to do a project dealing with circularity. And I think the circularity today should really be the basis of anything we design. You know, I discuss it often with Ellen MacArthur. We're both serving on the World Economic Forum Global Future Councils. And, you know, I totally agree with what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is promoting. You know, circularity has to be at the core of what we do in design. And one of the things that bothers me with a lot of this kind of temporary exhibition, now in the previous pavilion, we designed it in a way that all the glass would be reused afterwards and all the trees would be planted somewhere else. So circularity means you do what nature does. You don't waste anything. And what bothers me when you got temporary installation or similar is that people do a lot of, you know, temporary cardboard or plaster buildings or pavilions, and then all of that goes to a landfill afterwards. So what we try to do here, also because of the beauty of this little gem as a botanical garden, is in between a botanical garden and in the small, you know, small medieval garden you see here. So we say, can we do an architecture that would be almost like the dream of architecture of tomorrow, something that, like a plant, can grow from soil and go back to soil, and using mostly local resources. So what we did here, the whole project was done with mycelium. You know, mycelium is the root of mushroom, and those elements are 4 meters high. You know, it's not a full building. I'll tell you the story about the shape in a moment. But basically, we've been growing all of that in a few weeks before the opening of Milan Design Week. And then following Design Week, all of that went to composting again. So it went from the earth to architecture, simplified perhaps now, back to the earth in just a matter of a few weeks. And so we created these kind of different spaces. The reason for the arches is that the problem we ran into is that, you know, in particular, Italy being quite a bureaucratic place, nobody wanted to certify structures such as this one that were 4, 5, 6 meters high, made of mushroom. You know, all the structural engineers refused to certify them. And so what we did was actually go back to the origin of masonry structures. You know, the ones that so beautifully were studied by Professor Hyman at the University of Cambridge, the ones that Polanyi in the early 17th century developed in order to prove to the Pope at the time that St. Paul's Cathedral cupola wouldn't fall, which is based on catenary, inverted catenary. If you take a catenary and you invert it, then you get a pure compression structure, and you can be much safer from a structural point of view. Incidentally, you might remember all those beautiful examples and models done by Antoni Gaudí in Barcelona to get the right geometry for the Sagrada Familia. So anyway, that's how we did this. And so all of this follows this inverted catenary like Gaudí. And then, you know, there's also this kind of connections. Now, for the connections are also, you know, architecture starts when you put a brick on a brick, like Louis Kahn would have said, when you connect elements. And so here the connections were also important, how these elements stay together. You know, otherwise, they would be just arches in isolation. And those connections, actually, those are compostable material. They are compostable ropes. Interestingly, in the end, were done by a Japanese bondage master. We got a Japanese bondage master who came to do the connections, you know, that actually opened up a new world to some of the people in our office, but that's a different story. And here you can see some of the other elements, you know, again in the garden. They almost felt like an architecture growing out of the soil, and it was indeed grown out of the soil, you know, blending and merging with nature. Again, it was a very popular exhibition and won a number of awards. Very briefly, to summarize, I want to share with you we're working on the Italian pavilion at the World Expo in Dubai. If any of you is coming to Dubai, you'll see it here. Again, think about circularity. We said we wanted the pavilion to be made of boats that arrive to Dubai, become a temporary exhibition space, and then can continue navigating. So you see the 3 boats become the pavilion, and the pavilion itself, you know, here are some of the initial images that won us the competition. The pavilion itself is under those 3 boats, is a space that will be dismantled and where all the different units will keep navigating and moving afterwards. So I want to show you this, and I'll actually stop it here. I want to show you this from the point of view of, again, different ways to mix natural and artificial, and how we can really play with technology to infuse kind of life into the artificial world, how we can play with nature and blend nature and the natural and the artificial in other ways by bringing nature itself as a building material, either living nature or natural materials, as we just saw. So that's really what is at the core of what we research, both in our lab at MIT, both in our office in New York, in Turin, in Singapore, and how we try to play with this kind of what we see a necessary convergence between the natural and the artificial world. What can finally try to address and tackle some of the fractures of the Anthropocene. But I want to finish with one parting thought, just because I heard that there is a number of MPhil students and PhD students and or people who graduated recently about architecture, and this is just just a little message of hope. I know it's quite tough during the pandemic to get new jobs, and especially in architecture and construction. And also I want to tell you a little story to finish. Is the story of this man. This man is Luis Baragan. Luis Baragan has an interesting story. Luis Baragan was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and for most of his life until his 50s, he designed rather dull buildings during Mexico City's booming real estate time. And then one day, when he was over 50, he wrote in his diary this sentence: "I'm sick of listening to clients talking about their taste. I'm quitting with all my clients. From now on, I'm going to work for one client only, myself." And after writing this, he really stopped working for other clients, and he designed only a handful of buildings, 5 or 10. His own home in Calle Ramirez, Casa Gilardi next to it, a couple of homes in El Pedregal, a new development at the time in Mexico City, a beautiful convent. And with those few buildings, he actually won the Nobel Prize, won the Pritzker Prize, and changed the course of architecture in the second half of the 20th century. Now, he was lucky because somehow he could, at the beginning, make a significant amount of money to be able to dream in the second part of his career. But what I wanted to tell to each of you who might have graduated recently from university in design is that you can do the same, but you don't need to wait until 50, like Baragan did, over 50, like Baragan did. And so I want to tell you the story. What you can do is you can start with a dream and then use the internet, use the power of connections to find clients later. Instead of what Baragan said, getting rid of clients when you got enough financial independence, do the opposite. Just start from a dream and try to use crowdfunding or other systems in order to help you realize what you want to do. And that has happened to us a few times. The first time has happened to us with our first company in the United States that does micromobility, scooters. I believe today it does scooters. It started doing something else called the Copenhagen Wheel. And now it's been growing a lot, has become a unicorn recently. And I'm very happy because it can bring more sustainable solutions to cities. But it happened also with the little project I'm telling you. Remember I showed you this building, the Expo District of the Future we designed. Well, we didn't design the outside, by the way, of the building. We designed the inside. The outside was given to us. And then they were telling us what should we do outside. They wanted us to do a secondary facade just to cover the shoebox. But we didn't like it. It was a waste of energy, waste of money, waste of materials. Then they told us, why don't you cover that with a big giant LED screen? But I think we're spending already enough time in front of LEDs. I think, we need information, but we need to find better ways to get it. And so what we did at the time, this was 2015, 5 years ago, we started from people going to the expo We started from their faces and allowed them, if they wanted, to show their faces, but not on a screen, on an analog representation. We built basically what ended up being the largest plotter ever built. You see it here, and they turned the whole facade into a big plotter through this robotic arm. You see it here. You can paint with different colors. Here's a little video.
From petroglyphs to graffiti, man has always had an instinctive need to leave a sign of his passage. Convinced that this is not just art for art's sake, we tried to transport this process into the modern age, inventing a device traveling and writing on vertical walls, transforming any facade into a huge open source canvas. Installed at Expo 2015's Future Food District, the world's largest plotter moves on a 2-axis plane, drawing visitors' portraits using 5 different colors of spray paint. The flow of information helps reconfigure space with an open source approach to architecture. Just like the Stone Age, when people intervene directly on their built environment, walls become canvases to tell our stories.
So the little story is that when we were doing that, we also had a little robot that we would have on the wall, and a lot of people coming to the office would look at it, would enjoy, take a selfie, and so on. So a little vertical plotter, but unlike vertical plotters, all the intelligence was on the core, and just 2 cables would allow you to put it wherever you want in space. And so
why choose one decor when you can turn your wall into an interactive canvas?
Here you can see a little video that was done. Initially, I wasn't sure if you wanted to turn it into a product, but again, what you can do today is just share an idea, and maybe a community will help you realize. So I was a bit skeptical, so we set up a high bar to say, well, if with this video we are getting at least 200,000 euros, we're going to produce it. If not, we're going to kill the idea. And it turned out to be one of the top crowdfunding campaigns of the year called Scribd. And so that then led to a company that now started producing it. You see here with thousands of people around the world developing content for Scribd and plotting it, and customizing their kitchens, their living rooms, their homes, with artists, developing original content, such as the very Olafur Eliasson I mentioned before, who's developed original for Scribd. And that was just a little story. Now, a little story of how all of you today, don't need to do what Baragan did by waiting so long. The beauty of our connected world is that you don't need to care about clients at the beginning. Frank Lloyd Wright said, the 3 most important things in architecture are clients, clients, clients. Well, not anymore. Today, think about dream, 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 and then find clients later. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Carlo, thank you very much for the lecture and the conversation. I can speak on behalf of everybody that a lot of us have tremendous respect for the work that you do. And I personally have seen the Milan Expo, the 2015 exhibition, the installations that were created. I think I will start.
Rashid, I hope to see you. I guess I will see you in Dubai, right? At the Dubai Expo.
Of course, I'll be there, and hopefully welcome you again when with Noah next time. One of the quick questions that I have, Carlo, is one of the things that we're trying to tackle before getting into the questions is the overall theme about the challenges of vocation, the challenges of craftsmanship, and the connection to this whole idea of guilds. And the way cities are urbanizing and technology is transforming, these are one of the biggest challenges of adapting to these major changes. And I wondered if you can comment a little bit before I get into the questions about a big majority of the workforce is currently being displaced because of these new technological transformations, whether it's in carpentry, joinery, whether it's in specific craftsmanship. I wonder if you can comment just a little bit about that and share your thoughts. And then we'll just...
I will just share something. The first thing I would say is that the best person to discuss this is not myself, it's actually my colleague. I'm teaching with Richard Sennett at MIT. We're teaching a class every year. Richard is really the expert on, his book in the early 2000s was The Craftsman. So I think I know he has very interesting opinions now based on what happened with the pandemic. Look, my point is that you're right about displacement. Displacements can happen if you deal only with bits, with digital things. We tend to forget all the people who cannot do remote working just because they work with atoms, and atoms are in a physical location. So, we can connect tonight, and I just came back from America, I'm in Europe, and we can connect like this because we are dealing with bits. But when you deal with atoms, it's a different story. I think a very important thing is looking forward how we can address this new divide. We bridge all divides. I think the digital divide is probably not a big issue in most of the world anymore now that smartphones connect all of us to the internet. The old digital divide of the early 2000s. I think, but we have other divides, and certainly this is one of them. And I'm particularly concerned also when it touches upon the most disadvantaged communities, such as the people who actually have to bring atoms to our homes, the people who work for Amazon or similar, who have no choice. They cannot work remotely. They need to be in the battlefield. The other thing that comes to mind from this point of view that I want to share with you is that somehow we've seen all look with a lot of enthusiasm about this kind of new digital craftsmanship. And I remember in the early 2000s, I was at the Media Lab at MIT. I was still finishing my PhD at Cambridge, but I got a Fulbright fellowship to go to MIT. And I was in the basement at MIT where the first Fab Lab emerged. It was next to Neil Gershenfield's place. And it was the first Fab Lab. I remember all of us would spend nights at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. to work with these new machines, at the time magic machines, doing additive manufacturing, laser cutters to cut things and so on. And so we all had this idea. By the way, Richard Sennett's book was written in part when he was visiting MIT, I think in 2000, in the middle of the first decade of the 2000s, and actually looking at this and looking at how this could be a new way to think about craftsmanship. And he was really inspired by all of us spending nights and playing with these machines and see what we could do, and building not only physical things but also electronics with new Arduino boards, and all of what then became the Fab Lab movement. Actually, Neil Gershenfield was the Fab Lab movement happened because Neil Gershenfield was has a few years, he's a bit older than us, and at the time was coming all the time and seeing all of us playing day and night and see, wow, this is interesting. So maybe I should package this and start replicating this, all these machines, and create, a module that other people can play with. And that was kind of the beginning of this movement that now has been transforming, education and many other dimensions in cities all over the world. But what I want to say just is that there's a new transformation that we're witnessing now. And actually, in our offices, in the main office in Italy, we created a factory, which is around 1,000 square meters, which, if you want, is the same of what we were doing a few years ago with scale models, but now we do one-to-one models. Everything is digitally fabricated, everything is mounted assembled in the factory, everything then can be dismantled. So it's much more sustainable, goes back to circularity. And we did it, and just a couple of years ago, and we are building some of the buildings we designed or some of the prototypes one-to-one. And I see this kind of as a new frontier. And by the way, a couple of my colleagues, both Anton Garcia Abril, great colleague who teaches at MIT, he built his own factory in Cambridge, Massachusetts, more or less the same size. Then people such as Philippe Wan, who teaches both in Pennsylvania and in Shanghai. He has the same. Actually, he has built the same space for manufacturing, really one-to-one. So I see that as something interesting that's happening in the space of architecture. And I think something that maybe is the beginning precisely of what Richard Sennett was seeing when he wrote The Craftsman, as not only dealing with scale models with all these new machines, but going to manufacture really the one-to-one object, even the home.
I'll just jump into some questions, Carlo, if you don't mind. The first question is by Ines, who asks, how does the building recognize the user in order to tailor its response to him and her? Kind of a broad question.
It's a great question. I think if it is a theoretical question, I don't know if you're referring to a particular project of ours, but in the Milan project, in the Milan supermarket, it's about Kinect sensor. In other cases, in the Agnelli Foundation, it's about triangulation with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth through an app. So your phone is what is connecting with the building and allowing positioning. What we're seeing today in China is something both interesting and concerning, is that China is embracing very, very quickly facial recognition. So the building has eyes. And I think that's interesting, but it's also concerning because of privacy. And actually, I was the curator of the Venice Biennale, the Shenzhen Biennale last year. It's the end of the day here, sorry. So I was curator of the Shenzhen Biennale last year. Shenzhen Biennale is actually the largest biennale in terms of visitors in the world. And the theme we gave was Eyes of the City, really, again, because of buildings and cities are getting the ability to see us. And that is really changing our relationship with space. And facial recognition is one extreme example we should all look at very, very carefully.
Let me jump into, we have about 3 more questions, so I'm just also mindful of time, Carlo. So just let us know if we can answer.
I was looking at the people listening, by the way, to see if there was anybody from the Martin Center I knew. I see Tom Benson, who I think is a Tom Benson, I know from MIT, but anyway, I was just looking at a list of attendees.
So Simon asks the question, or Simone, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name. Thank you very much for your work and sharing it today. Always a great resource and inspiration. Starting from 2 projects, the carpooling project to manage the fleets of taxis and the supermarket of the future. I'd like to know how you imagine the future of the distribution of goods in the city of today and tomorrow, and the new face it will take on when retailers will have to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think, first of all, let me tell you a couple of things. The first thing, we talked about cars because I want to show you some of the work, but we're not necessarily great fans of cars. As I mentioned, micromobility is something I believe a lot in. When you need to move in a city, in most cities, people need to have to move for 1 or 2 miles. Most of the trips are 1 or 2 miles. It doesn't make any sense to move 1 or 2 tons of steel, like the weight of an SUV, in order to move the weight of a person for 1 or 2 miles. That's nonsense. And so, the micromobility addresses that. And I hope the micromobility also will be used more for moving goods around the city. So again, today, moving goods is not very sustainable. In the past, a few years ago, I would go to shop 2 or 3 times per week in Boston to whatever, Whole Foods and a few other places. Now, today, I'm doing everything online, and the results is that I get several deliveries per day to my apartment. Granted, some deliveries that come to my apartment also go to other apartments next to mine, but still, we're creating a system, especially if you want more and more this kind of very quick delivery. We're creating a lot of traffic, and more than that, also we're creating a big issue for local businesses. So I hope that we need to address, I hope that we will be able to address 2 things. One is, having more sustainable ways to move goods around, and again, equivalent of micromobility, but for logistics. And then the second thing is that we really need to think carefully about how can we preserve the richness of commerce in our streets. Think about the beautiful cities we love. I was talking to the mayor of Paris, and the vice mayor was saying, can we accept that Amazon or somebody else in the future might destroy all of the life we have on our streets because all the small commerce shut it down. And the answer is not. We cannot. So we also need to think about how we can get to a better balance between what is delivered to our homes and what we still want to enjoy in the city. The city, ultimately, the first cities, as you know, out of all the theories about cities are born in the very beginning as central places. Central places are places where the market is, where goods are. And so we need to retain that component if you want to be faithful to the very origin of our cities.
I'll read the next question by Sophia. Is the idea of blending the city with nature an artificial? An artifice? Since, as it has been confirmed that with COVID-19, the city is the people, not the buildings. In this sense, cities and buildings have always been natural.
I like the question. I think it's very interesting. Actually, it's if I understand it correctly, the city, if you want, this blending, yes, it is there. It is there through the human component, but we can't forget that somehow, sometimes we say that buildings are our third skin. We got our own skin, the skin of our clothes, and then the skin of our buildings. But the skin of our buildings has been rigid. I would say it has been more like a corset in the past, an uncompromising skin. And I think what we can do today is really turn the skin into something much more dynamic, that's able to fit better us as humans in the city. So yes, going back, if I understand the question correctly, yes, there's always been an interactive human, natural component in the world, the artificial. We actually, what comes to mind is the beautiful essay that about Darwin amongst the machines by Butler, that was a contemporary Darwin, where he looked at the artificial world as something that uses human in order to reproduce itself, machine using humans to reproduce themselves. So somehow, it reminds me of that. But yes, we always had the two components, but somehow the artificial has been rather uncompromising. This kind of corset that tomorrow, thanks to new technologies, materials, intelligence, sensing, actuating, and the very nature itself can become a much more flexible and malleable and responsive skin for all of us. By the way, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to read the question. Should I read the question?
Yes, please.
Matteo, a question from Matteo. I know there's one more question that just came in. So thank you for your amazing stories, Carlo. A provocative question. How can we design products, services, environment, and experience for the real people, their needs, their aspirations, and desire by only dreaming and not talking to clients and people?
Sorry, but what was the word before people?
So a provocative question: how can we design products, services, environment, and experience for the real people?
Oh, for the real people, yeah, for the real people. Sorry, I didn't get that. The real. Well, what I was saying is again, going back to the Baragan story. Baragan had to buy his freedom, and he did that by working for 50 years, gaining, setting aside, earning enough money in order to buy his freedom. And today, as I was saying, the beauty of the world we are living in is, with this interconnectivity, is that through sharing ideas, we can find clients later. So we don't need to start from a client and then fight about, the client's desires and our desire. I remember a conversation with Jean Nouvel, who was saying, really a lot of my projects are screwed up when, the client wants to go one way and I want to go another way. While the best projects are when there's a convergence. But today we can get the convergence automatically and much faster. Is again, start with a project, share it. Again, crowdfunding platforms are an interesting approach, but there's more and more ways to do this online. And then if that idea has value, if that idea is strong, if that idea has legs, you'll be able to find clients, in quotes, later, who will support you and help you build it. And again, I showed the little story of Scribit, but this happened to us quite a few times, where we were developing a prototype. We shared it. The prototype went viral online, and that was the beginning for us to start building it and turn it into reality. Somehow, the way, by the way, if some of you are interested, there was an, if you want to explore this a bit more in depth, there was an article by Jacques Herzog in Domus, published in Domus a couple of months ago. And I thought it was a bit sad because he was saying, you know, what can we do to improve our world as architects? You know, ultimately his point was, as architects, we can just follow our clients. That was his starting point. And so I replied with another article that you find online in Domus, together with Dan Rosegaard. Dan and I are good friends. I don't know if you know Dan, but he's, you know, a great radical architect and artist based in the Netherlands. So Dan and I replied, and you know, we looked at this and we somehow started developing this idea of design as a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, in economics, you talk about self-fulfilling prophecy when you talk about something, and the very fact of talking about it makes that a reality. So for instance, if people talk about inflation, well, inflation, they will materialize because people will have expectations for inflation. That's one example. But self-fulfilling prophecies are a very established field in different disciplines. And somehow it would be nice to see architecture as a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start with an idea, and the very fact of proposing that idea, then, you know, can turn that idea into reality. I want to add something else on this. Is I see actually Francois Pence is here. You know, we had the pleasure of having Francois at the opening of the Shenzhen Biennale last year. And you know, again, one of the things we tried to do with that section was to explore different utopias, but really with thinking about the Biennale as the first step for something that then could change cities permanently. And I'll mention something. I don't know if I'm allowed. I was just asked to curate Manifesta next year. I think it's still, I mean, it's not a big news, but so I'll share it. It's not announced yet. And what we want to do there is exactly that. Is going to be in a city in the Balkan. I will not mention the name yet, but basically, it's really how can we use this architecture as a self-fulfilling prophecy, use the Biennale in order to do temporary, put forward ideas, implemented in a temporary way, so that then later they can become permanent transformations of our cities.
Yeah, for sure. I know the fact that Manifesta in Sicily a couple of years ago was very successful. Was it Manifesta?
Yes, actually, Rem Koolhaas followed Manifesta in Sicily, and I think, you know, we were building on actually a lot of the things he did in order to develop this kind of new methodology based on what it was.
Carlo, I'm just mindful of your time. Can you take 2 more questions or one more question?
Yes.
So there's a question from Lide that says, "Thank you very much, Carlo, for this fantastic sharing. I highly agree that the emerging revolutionary technologies are quickly reshaping the urban landscape, but how do you think we can come up with new urban interventions with more citizen participation? Living Lab, a concept raised by MIT, seems as a concept that is inviting stakeholders to join the discussion. What do you think of it in the ways of making a smarter city?"
Yeah, I think this is a long, okay, I need to cut this question a bit short because it's a long conversation. It's also something I'm very passionate about. A few years ago, I wrote a book. We wrote it in a collaborative way. It was published by Thames and Hudson, called Open Source Architecture, really arguing for more participation. Now, the truth is, if you look at traditional participation has a number of limits. You know, usually people self-select. So when you go and do meetings and so on, you always have the same people around the table. Like Christopher Alexander, one of the great advocates of participation, just 2 minutes. Sorry, but one of the great advocates of participation said, it's, you know, once you put more than 10 or 15 people around the table, then it becomes kind of a mess. And then the other thing is that many people, you know, if we study architecture, we are able to read a drawing, understand the rendering, really try to have abstract thinking in order to imagine how a city may change. But it's much more difficult for many other people who are not trained in the same disciplines. And so the idea is, what I think is interesting, is something that you could call A/B urbanism. A/B urbanism is inspired from what happens with A/B testing. You might be familiar with A/B testing, you know, when you try online A or B and see what works better. Zara, the Spanish fashion company, did in a very successful way. Actually, the key idea behind its success was producing very fast, producing many more things, many different designs, throwing them into the shops, and then if something is popular, if people like something, then you can just ramp up production very quickly. Very different way to really try different things, which is, you know, it's very similar to what nature does. Nature tries many mutations, then one mutation will be the mutation that can change a paradigm. So somehow, you know, as designers, we can be like mutagens. We can consider ourselves like mutagens that can produce this. So going back to that, I think to me, what is interesting is this kind of A/B urbanism is how we can not only invite people around the table to talk about the future of the city, but really try to transform the city itself in a very simple way with paint, just to reprogram the city with temporary installations, and then let people vote with their feet. You know, feet voting, foot voting is then what is going to be much more powerful, because everybody's going to be involved. You know, you're part of the process, and then, you know, you don't need to try to understand the future plans, you're reacting to a certain condition. So somehow we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, when a lot of cities have been discussing for like 10 years about a new bicycle path, and then they did it in a few days, and just, you know, got feedback from people. Some of those paths will stay in the long term, some of those will be modified. So somehow, you know, I think this idea of A/B testing is something we should develop more, and I think could be a new paradigm for participation. Again, leveraging digital connectivity with physical intervention can be very, very powerful. Again, we would talk about this for hours, so I'll stop here, but just to share a little bit about how I think there's a lot of hope for participation, but we need to find a different way than what was done in a great way by people such as Chris Alexander, Jonah Bracken, and all the others in the 70s, how we can take those lessons and, thanks to digital, bring them to the present.
Well, Carlo, I can't express on behalf of all of our co-conveners how grateful we are that you came and you gave this talk. We hope to invite you hopefully in the future. I wanted to thank Sophia, Mateus, Simone, Inez, Ide, and Kai for their questions. I'm really grateful, Carlo, and really enjoyed the lecture. If there's anything we can do, we're more than grateful for that.
Thank you. No, it has been great being with you. I hope we'll see each other. You know, if there were no pandemic, I would have loved to be with you in Cambridge. As I said, I got very, very fond memories of the time I spent in the city, at the university, at the Martin Center in particular. So hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person soon. And meanwhile, if any of you, you know, when travel resumes, if any of you is coming to Boston, New York, our MIT is Boston and Singapore, our offices in New York, Turin and Singapore. So if you're coming to one of those cities, do come and visit us, and we can continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye. Thank you.